It wasn't just another American fighter, it was the weapon that would destroy Japanese naval aviation forever. On June 19, 1944, when those dark blue Hellcats dove through our formations with devastating precision, every Japanese pilot in the sky knew the age of the Zero was over. The F6F Hellcat didn't just outclass the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0, it hunted it with methodical efficiency. 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns that converged at the perfect killing range, armor plating that made it virtually indestructible, and that massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, 2,000 horsepower that could push the Hellcat to 380 miles per hour and climb at over 2,500 feet per minute. What happened that day over the Philippine Sea wasn't a battle, it was an execution. In what American pilots would call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost approximately 480 aircraft, while the Americans lost just 33 planes. This is the true story of how the F6F Hellcat became the most successful fighter aircraft in naval history, achieving an unprecedented kill ratio of 19-1, and how it crushed the once invincible Zero in the most decisive carrier battle ever fought. The path to this decisive day began on June 6, 1944, as Task Force 58 sortied from Majuro Harbour in the Marshall Islands. It took 5 full hours for the final ship to clear the harbour. The largest carrier force ever assembled was heading for the Marianas. Vice Admiral Mark A. Mitcher, the wizened pioneer aviator who had been flying since 1915, commanded this massive armada from his flagship, USS Lexington. 15 fast carriers, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, and 69 destroyers spread across miles of ocean. The carriers alone carried 956 aircraft, with 475 of them being F6F Hellcats. The force was organized into 4 task groups, each capable of independent operation. Task Group 58.1, under Rear Admiral J.J. Jocko Clark aboard USS Hornet, included Yorktown, Belleau Wood, and Bataan. Task Group 58.2, commanded by Rear Admiral A.E. Montgomery from USS Bunker Hill, included Wasp, Monterey, and Cabot. Task Group 58.3, under Rear Admiral J.W. Reeves aboard USS Enterprise, included Lexington, Princeton, and San Jacinto. Task Group 58.4, commanded by Rear Admiral W.K. Harrell from USS Essex, included Langley and Copenhagen. Against this force, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa could muster 9 carriers with approximately 430 aircraft. The first mobile fleet included the newest carrier Taiho as Ozawa's flagship, the Pearl Harbor veterans Shokaku and Zuikaku, plus Junyo, Hyo, Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. But the numbers told only part of the story. Most of Ozawa's pilots were inexperienced replacements with less than 100 hours of training. Some had as little as 50 hours total flight time. Many had never fired their guns in training due to ammunition shortages. They were flying into combat against American pilots who averaged 300 to 400 hours of training, including extensive gunnery practice and carrier qualification. On June 11, 1944, Task Force 58 began its assault on the Marianas. Fighter sweeps and bombing raids hit Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The Japanese were caught by surprise. They had expected the next American target to be the Carolines or Palaos. Only 50 land-based aircraft defended the Marianas. In the first sweep alone, 208 Hellcats claimed 86 Japanese aircraft destroyed. The systematic destruction of Japanese air power in the Marianas had begun. Commander David McCampbell, commanding Air Group 15 from USS Essex, led his squadrons in these preliminary strikes. McCampbell, a 34-year-old Alabama native, had joined VF-15 as a squadron commander who initially couldn't even qualify in gunnery. His pilots had secretly helped him pass his qualification, painting their bullets the same color as his. Now he was about to become the Navy's all-time leading ace. On June 15th, American forces landed on Saipan. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, immediately activated Operation Eigo. This was Japan's last chance for the decisive battle they had sought since Midway. Every available ship and aircraft was committed. The plan relied on Ozawa's carrier aircraft working in conjunction with land-based planes from Guam and Tinian, plus the advantage of the Japanese planes' longer range. They could strike from beyond American range, land on Guam to refuel and rearm, then strike again. But the Americans had advantages Ozawa didn't fully appreciate. Task Force 58's radar could detect incoming raids at 150 miles. Fighter directors in each carrier's combat information center could vector Hellcats to perfect intercept positions. The proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, still classified top secret, would devastate any aircraft that got through the fighter screen. And most importantly, the F6F Hellcat was specifically designed to kill Zeros. The morning of June 19th began with pre-dawn preparations. In VF-16's ready room aboard Lexington, Lieutenant Junior Grade Alexander Vratsiu checked his plotting board and equipment. Already an ace with 12 victories, Vratsiu had spent months as wingman to Edward Butch O'Hare, learning from the Navy's first ace. Now flying with VF-16, he was about to have the most spectacular day of his career. At 07:45 hours, the submarine USS Albacore, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, fired 6 torpedoes at Ozawa's flagship Taiho. Warrant Officer Sakio Komatsu, flying overhead, saw the torpedo wakes and deliberately crashed his aircraft into one torpedo to save the ship. His sacrifice destroyed one torpedo, but another struck Taiho's forward elevator pit. The damage seemed minor, but ruptured fuel lines were already releasing deadly vapors into the ship. An inexperienced damage control officer made a fatal error, opening the ventilation system to clear the fumes. Instead, it spread them throughout the ship. At 15:32 hours, Taiho would explode and sink, taking 1,650 men with her. At 08:30, radar operators across Task Force 58 detected the first Japanese strike wave. 69 aircraft launched from Ozawa's carriers at maximum range. The fighter directors went to work immediately. Vector 250, Angels 25, bogies approaching, crackled over the radio waves. Hellcats already airborne climbed for altitude advantage. Those on deck scrambled to launch. Commander Charles Brewer, leading VF-15 from Essex, was among the first to spot the incoming raid. Tally-ho! Bandits bearing 265, distance 40 miles, Angels 18. The professional killer machine of American naval aviation swung into action. Hellcats from multiple carriers converged on the Japanese formation, directed by fighter controllers who could see the entire battle developing on their radar screens. The Japanese pilots maintained tight formation, flying straight and level toward their targets. It was their first and fatal mistake. Lieutenant Commander Paul Bui, commanding VF-16, later described the interception. They came in perfect formation, like they were on parade. Our guys couldn't believe it. They just held formation while we shot them to pieces. Commander McCampbell led 12 Hellcats from VF-15 at 25,000 feet when he spotted the enemy formation below. I made a modified high-side run, he later wrote, and only my starboard guns fired, which threw me into a violent skid. Guns were charged twice again, and since my target had pushed over and gained high speed, a stern chase ensued. The Judy dive bomber he was chasing tried to escape, but McCampbell's Hellcat was faster. His 6 guns converged and the Judy exploded. The slaughter had begun. McCampbell destroyed 5 Judy dive bombers in the morning engagement, then later that afternoon shot down 2 Mitsubishi A6M0s over Guam for a total of 7 victories on June 19th. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, would later distinguish himself at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Junior Grade Alexander Vratsiu was having his own problems. His F6F's supercharger had malfunctioned, limiting his altitude and speed. Unable to keep up with his squadron, he led his division back toward the task force. As they approached, Vratiou spotted a large formation of Judy dive bombers heading for the American ships. What happened next became legend. They were so thick against the water below, Vratiou later recalled. I felt like a kid with a plate of cookies, afraid someone else was going to take some even though I had all I could stuff. In just 8 minutes, using only 360 rounds of ammunition, about 10 rounds per gun per kill, Vratiou shot down 6 Judy dive bombers. His marksmanship was nearly perfect. After landing on Lexington, Vratiou climbed out of his Hellcat and, still wearing his flight gear, held up 6 fingers for the photographers. The photograph became iconic, the grinning young ace symbolizing American dominance in the air. When he inspected his aircraft, he discovered the wing-fold pins were protruding. He had flown his greatest mission with his wings only partially secured. The first wave was being annihilated. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. The few survivors who returned to their carriers reported scenes of horror, Hellcats everywhere, coming from above, from the sides, always with superior speed and firepower. The second wave of 128 aircraft launched at 0900 met an even worse fate. By now, every Hellcat in Task Force 58 was either airborne or ready to launch. The fighter directors had perfect radar plots of the incoming raid. The Japanese flew into a wall of Hellcats positioned at perfect intercept altitudes. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia of VF-9, flying from USS Yorktown, had developed what he called the mowing machine tactic. Working with 3 other pilots, James French, Clinton Smith, and Harris Mitchell, Valencia had created perhaps the deadliest division in naval aviation. They would later claim 50 victories between them, but on June 19th they were part of the larger defensive effort. Fighting Squadron 1 from Yorktown had a spectacular day. Led by Commander Smoke Streen, VF-1 claimed 37 Japanese aircraft destroyed. Lieutenant Junior Grade George Carr shot down 5 planes, becoming an ace in a single day. The squadron's Hellcats dove from 24,000 feet into masses of Japanese aircraft 10,000 feet below, their 6 guns blazing. The technical superiority of the Hellcat was overwhelming. Where the Zero weighed 5,313 pounds loaded, the Hellcat weighed 12,598 pounds. That extra weight was armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and structural strength. The Zero's pilot sat behind a thin aluminum panel. The Hellcat pilot was protected by armor plate behind and below, bulletproof glass in front. The Zero's fuel tanks would explode from a single incendiary bullet. The Hellcat's tanks would seal themselves, using layers of rubber that swelled when punctured. The engine difference was equally decisive. The F6F3's Pratt & Whitney R 2800-10 produced 2,000 horsepower, with water injection boosting it to 2,200 horsepower for combat emergency power. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai 21 managed only 1,130 horsepower. This meant the Hellcat could outclimb, outdive, and outrun the Zero at any altitude. At 20,000 feet, where much of the combat took place, the Hellcat could climb at 2,000 feet per minute. The Zero managed perhaps 1,500 feet per minute, and that rate decreased rapidly with altitude. The armament told its own story. The Hellcat's 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns each carried 400 rounds, total 2,400 rounds. The guns were bore-sighted to converge at a specific range, creating a cone of destruction. The Zero typically carried 2 Type 99 20mm cannons with only 60 rounds each, plus 2 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns. While the 20mm was more powerful per round, the limited ammunition meant Zero pilots had to be extremely careful with their shooting. Hellcat pilots could fire long bursts, walking their tracers onto target. At 1000 hours, the third wave of 47 aircraft approached. These were from Ozawa's Carrier Division, 2, Junyo, Hyo, and Ryuho. They immediately got lost, failing to track the American movements. only 7 would return to their carriers. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, a Pearl Harbor veteran flying from Junyo, was one of the few experienced pilots in this wave. After being forced to crash land on Rota Island when his fuel ran out, he examined his damaged aircraft and exclaimed, "I never saw so many Grummans." His plane was riddled with bullet holes. Commander James Jig Dog Ramage, leading Bombing Squadron 10 from Enterprise, watched the fighter pilots at work. "Our fighters really had a field day. The Japanese came in perfect formations and our boys just cut them to pieces. It was like watching a training exercise, except the targets were real." The fourth wave of 82 aircraft launched at 1100 hours met the same fate. By now, American pilots were almost feeling sorry for their opponents. Ensign William Spider Webb of VF-2 later recalled, "They were so green. They held formation while being shot at. They didn't even try evasive maneuvers. It was both impressive and heartbreaking to watch such brave men fly to certain death." But not all American pilots survived unscathed. Commander Charles Brewer of VF-15, after shooting down 3 enemy aircraft, was himself shot down and killed over Guam. His loss reminded everyone that even in a turkey shoot, war extracted its price. Lieutenant Commander James Flatley took over VF-15, continuing the squadron's devastating effectiveness. At 11:18 hours, USS Kavala, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler, fired 6 torpedoes at the carrier Shokaku. The submarine had maneuvered into perfect position, and 3 torpedoes struck home. The Pearl Harbor veteran, displacing 32,100 tons fully loaded, went down with heavy loss of life. 2 of Japan's newest and largest carriers were now gone. The radar advantage cannot be overstated. The SK and SK-2 radar systems could detect aircraft at 150 miles, giving the Americans 30 to 40 minutes warning of incoming raids. The Japanese had only visual detection, usually spotting American fighters when they were already in firing position. Lieutenant Joseph Eggert, fighter director aboard Lexington, was credited with vectoring fighters to intercept 35 enemy aircraft. He could see the entire battle on his radar scope, like a chess master seeing the whole board while his opponent could only see individual pieces. The fighter direction system was revolutionary. Each carrier's combat information center was a darkened room filled with radar scopes, plotting boards, and radio equipment. Trained fighter directors could track multiple raids, vector fighters to intercept, warn of approaching threats, and coordinate the entire defense. They spoke in calm, measured tones, even as dozens of enemy aircraft approached. Vector 270, Angels 20, bogies approaching. Investigate and report. Lieutenant Commander William R. Killer. Kane, commanding Air Group 10 from Enterprise, flew on both June 19th and 20th. In his diary, he wrote, "The greatest air defeat suffered by any nation, ever." Kane had started the war flying obsolete aircraft against superior Japanese pilots. Now he commanded squadrons equipped with the best fighter in the world, flown by superbly trained pilots, directed by radar controllers who could see everything. The American training system was perhaps the greatest advantage. By June 1944, new pilots arrived with 300 to 400 hours of flight time. They had practiced carrier landings dozens of times on converted Great Lakes paddle-wheelers. They had fired thousands of rounds in gunnery practice. They knew their aircraft intimately. In contrast, Japanese pilot training had collapsed. Where once they produced highly skilled pilots with 500-plus hours of training, by 1944 they were sending boys into combat with 50 to 100 hours total time. The rotation system multiplied American advantages. Experienced pilots like Lieutenant Commander John S. Jimmy Thatch, inventor of the Thatch-Weave defensive tactic, were rotated home to train new pilots. Their combat experience was institutionalized, taught to every new pilot. The Japanese kept their experienced pilots in combat until they died. By June 1944, almost all the Pearl Harbor and Midway veterans were dead. The few survivors, like Zenji Abe, were overwhelmed trying to lead inexperienced pilots against superior American forces. The communications advantage was crucial. American pilots had reliable VHF radios using standardized terminology. They could coordinate attacks, warn of threats, and maintain situational awareness. "Brake right, Blue 2, 0 on your 6. "Roger, braking right, thanks, lead." Japanese radios were notoriously unreliable. Many pilots flew without them to save weight, relying on hand signals impossible to see in combat. By noon on June 19th, the first phase of the battle was over. The Japanese had launched 373 carrier aircraft in 4 waves. Approximately 346 carrier aircraft had been shot down on June 19th alone. American losses were 33 aircraft and 26 flight personnel, most operational accidents rather than combat losses. The ocean around Task Force 58 was littered with burning wreckage, oil slicks, and Japanese pilots in life rafts. Admiral Mitcher, watching from Lexington's flag bridge, turned to his staff and said, "The Japanese carrier air force has been destroyed. They'll never recover from this." He was right. Japan had lost not just aircraft, but irreplaceable pilots. The carriers might be repaired or replaced, but the trained air crew could not be regenerated in the time Japan had left. The afternoon saw continued action over Guam and Rota, as American fighters caught Japanese aircraft trying to land and refuel. VF-16's pilots, including Vrasiu, flew multiple sorties, adding to their victory tallies. The total Japanese losses for the day would reach approximately 480 aircraft, when including land-based planes destroyed. The maintenance crews worked miracles. Damaged Hellcats were repaired overnight, ready to fly again the next day. The American logistics system delivered fuel, ammunition, and spare parts in enormous quantities. Each carrier had machine shops capable of manufacturing parts. Damaged engines were swapped out in hours. The Japanese, meanwhile, struggled to keep their remaining aircraft operational, cannibalizing damaged planes for parts. As the sun set on June 19th, Admiral Ozawa still believed he might salvage something from the disaster. He had no idea of the scale of his losses. Returning pilots reported shooting down hundreds of American aircraft. In reality, they had shot down almost none. The few Japanese pilots who survived were exhausted, demoralized, and traumatized by the day's events. June 20th brought the second phase of the battle, the American counterstrike. Search planes had been looking for the Japanese fleet all day. At 15:40, Lieutenant Robert Nelson from Enterprise finally found them, 275 miles west of Task Force 58. It was extreme range for the American aircraft, and launching so late meant they would return after dark. But Mitcher didn't hesitate. Launch 'em. At 16:24, Task Force 58 began launching 216 aircraft, 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, and 54 torpedo bombers. Every pilot knew the risks. They would be flying to the absolute limit of their range. Many would not have enough fuel to return. But the chance to finish off the Japanese fleet was too good to miss. Lieutenant Commander Ramage led VB-10's Dauntlesses from Enterprise. As they approached the Japanese fleet, he could see 3 carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers spread across miles of ocean. The few remaining Japanese fighters rose to intercept, but they were overwhelmed by the escorting Hellcats. The attack was confused but effective. The carrier Hiyo took several bomb and torpedo hits and sank. Zuikaku was heavily damaged, as were the carriers Junyo and Chiyoda. The battleship Haruna took a bomb hit, and 2 oilers were sunk. But the real drama came on the return flight. As darkness fell, American aircraft began running out of fuel, the radio filled with desperate calls. "This is Blue 7. Engine quit. Going in. Red 3 ditching. Send help." Pilots watched their fuel gauges drop toward empty, calculating whether they could make it back. Admiral Mitscher made one of the war's most famous decisions. Despite the submarine threat, he ordered, "Turn on the lights." Every ship in Task Force 58 illuminated. Searchlights pointed skyward, flight deck lights blazing, even star shells fired into the air. It was like Times Square in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Commander John Gray of VF-18 later described the scene. "I was down to fumes when I saw those lights. It was the most beautiful sight of my life. I didn't care which carrier, I just needed a deck. I landed on Yorktown instead of Hornet, but they took me in like I belonged there." The recovery was chaotic. Planes landed on any available deck. Some crashed on landing, blocking flight decks. Others ditched alongside ships. Destroyers picked up pilots from the water. Of the 216 aircraft launched, 80 were lost, but most of the pilots were rescued. The human cost was 49 aircrew killed or missing, still less than the Japanese lost in pilots from just one carrier. Commander Kane wrote in his diary, "Mitscher took a hell of a risk lighting up the fleet, but he saved a lot of good men. That's the kind of leader men will follow anywhere." The Battle of the Philippine Sea was over. In 2 days, the Japanese had lost approximately 600 aircraft, 3 carriers, and 2 oilers. More importantly, they had lost nearly all their remaining trained carrier pilots. American losses were 123 aircraft, most from fuel exhaustion on June 20th, not combat. The technical specifications that made the Hellcat dominant tell the complete story. The F6F-3, the main production variant at Philippine Sea, had a wingspan of 42 feet 10 inches and length of 33 feet 7 inches. Its empty weight of 9,238 pounds included armor plating around the cockpit, oil cooler, and oil tank. The self-sealing fuel tanks could take multiple hits and keep functioning. The bulletproof windscreen could stop 20mm cannon shells. The R2800-10 engine was a masterpiece of engineering. With water injection, it could produce 2,200 horsepower for combat emergency power. The engine was incredibly reliable. Many Hellcats returned with cylinders shot off and still running. The 3-bladed Hamilton Standard propeller was perfectly matched to the engine, providing excellent climb and acceleration. The armament installation was carefully designed. The 6 guns were staggered to prevent interference, with 400 rounds per gun fed from boxes in the wings. The guns were harmonized to converge at 300 yards, creating a pattern about 6 feet in diameter where all 6 streams of bullets met. A 2-second burst put 200 rounds into that small area. Nothing could survive it. The cockpit was designed for combat. The pilot sat high, with excellent visibility in all directions. The controls were well placed and instinctive. The gun sight was a reflector type, projecting an aiming reticle onto a glass plate in front of the pilot. Unlike the Zero, which required constant adjustment of controls to stay in trim, the Hellcat was stable and flew almost hands-off. Production quality was consistent. Grumman built 12,275 Hellcats between 1942 and 1945, with peak production of 500 per month. Every aircraft was identical, with completely interchangeable parts. A Hellcat built in 1943 used the same parts as one built in 1945. This standardization made maintenance simple and efficient. The Zero, by contrast, was still partially hand-built in 1944. Each aircraft was slightly different. Quality was declining as Japan ran short of materials. Experienced workers had been drafted into the military. The engines couldn't produce rated power due to poor fuel quality and manufacturing tolerances. The fuel situation illustrated the broader problem. American carriers used 100-octane aviation fuel, specially refined for maximum performance. The Japanese were down to 87-octane fuel, reducing engine power and increasing mechanical problems. American pilots could push their engines to combat power without worry. Japanese pilots risked engine failure if they demanded too much from their worn engines. The logistics chain supporting the Hellcat was enormous. Fleet oilers brought millions of gallons of fuel. Supply ships delivered spare parts by the ton. Escort carriers ferried replacement aircraft. The mobile service squadrons could perform depot-level maintenance at forward bases. It was industrial warfare on a scale the Japanese couldn't match. The human factor remained decisive. American pilots knew they were flying the best fighter in the world. They had confidence in their training, their aircraft, and their leadership. If shot down, they knew massive rescue efforts would be made to save them. Japanese pilots knew they were flying inferior aircraft with minimal training against a superior enemy. Being shot down meant death or capture. The psychological impact of the turkey shoot was devastating. Survivors spread word of the Hellcat's invincibility throughout Japanese naval aviation. Morale plummeted. Many pilots began viewing missions as suicide runs, even before the formal adoption of kamikaze tactics. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated them physically, it had broken their spirit. Post-war analysis revealed the true scale of the victory. Japanese records confirmed American claims were actually conservative. In many cases, Japanese losses were higher than reported. The kill ratio of 19-1 wasn't propaganda. It was documented fact from both sides' records. The Hellcat continued its dominance throughout the war. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Commander McCampbell would shoot down 9 Japanese aircraft in a single mission, setting a U.S. record. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, shot down 6 more. 2 pilots had shot down 15 aircraft between them, more than many squadrons managed in a day early in the war. By war's end, Hellcats had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, while losing only 270 to enemy aircraft. That incredible 19-1 ratio. They flew 66,530 combat sorties, dropped 6,503 tons of bombs, and established American air superiority wherever they operated. The design philosophy behind the Hellcat influenced all subsequent American fighters. The emphasis on pilot protection, heavy firepower, and robust construction became standard. The Hellcat proved that in modern warfare, the side with better technology, training, and industry would prevail. Looking back, the Great Marianas turkey shoot was more than a battle. It was vindication of the American approach to war. While the Japanese clung to concepts of individual warrior spirit and lightweight maneuverable aircraft, the Americans had embraced industrial warfare. The Hellcat was its perfect expression, tough, powerful, and available in overwhelming numbers. Admiral Ozawa survived the war and later reflected on the battle's significance, acknowledging that the Battle of the Philippine Sea marked the end of Japanese carrier aviation. The American Hellcat, combined with superior pilot training and industrial capacity, had proven decisive in achieving victory. Commander David McCampbell, who ended the war with 34 victories, all in Hellcats, put it simply. The Hellcat was an honest airplane. It did exactly what you asked it to do. It brought you home. In combat, that's all that matters. As the sun set on June 19, 1944, Japanese naval aviation was finished as an effective force. The survivors, limping back to their carriers, knew they had met their master in the F6F Hellcat. The dark blue fighter with the white star had ended the myth of Japanese air superiority forever. In a single day, American industry, training, and technology had triumphed over Japanese courage and spirit. The Great Marianas turkey shoot was more than a battle. It was the demonstration of total American air supremacy, delivered by the lethal superiority